G'day, ladies and gentlemen, I am on fire. Sit down, put your ear muffles on and listen up, because this is part 2 of the verge of collapse, the Canadian real estate market, specifically Toronto. But I'm going to give you a thesis on why I think you might even be worth buying real estate, and we're going to break down how the entire Canadian economy works as I see it today. So let's jump right into this. Welcome back, my passive income investors alike. This is a very important video in response to the verge of collapse. That was the first video I made that really did insanely well. You guys have commented and asked me all kinds of things. I've been talking to people that are worth millions in real estate, and I've been talking to people that are just like me, that are just trying to get into real estate, and I've learned quite a lot, but I've realized you guys don't fully understand where my opinion came from, because I've had to clear some things up with a lot of you guys. And I know I was talking about how I'm not in a rush to buy real estate because I can't be, and I'm just going to break all this down from the different perspectives. But we have to first begin to understand the entire Canadian economy, and I'm going to try to do that as simply as possible for you guys today to help give you a better understanding of where the economy is and why I think real estate is in for some form of a correction over the next 5 years. Now, basically, that does not mean that I don't think real estate is a good investment, which I'm going to get back to in a second. But let's just start with the basic things I've done for you guys here. And we're going to start with gross domestic product sales. Don't get bored on me yet here, all right? We're just getting started, but we're talking about GDP. GDP literally stands for every time you've spent money and bought a product, okay? Gross domestic product sales, guys. If you look at that one number, it tells us if we're heading in a recession, if that number is going down, and if that number is going up, the more it goes up, the better the economy is doing. And you can see here, guys, there's some really interesting facts, and a lot has changed in Canada. Most of our product sales and industry used to come from oil, import-export, along with basically automotive, cars, GM. Those companies were dominating most of our gross domestic product sales until the last 5 to 10 years. A lot has changed, guys. I want to ask you, let me know in the comment section below, what do you do for work? What do you do for work? Because something tells me that you are somehow involved in the services industry. And I'm saying that because it's crazy to think that 70% of the total revenue in Canada comes from non-tangible object services. So basically people servicing you. Not in that way, of course, but we're just talking about basically, like, say you're a bartender, or you're like me, basically showing information on YouTube. This is all like intangible stuff, and it would be considered a service. That makes up 70% of Canada's total revenue, GDP. It's crazy to think that is the reality of it. And then I want to tell you why Northland Power, in my 6-figure dividend portfolio, I talk about this utility that I own. It was one of the first stocks I ever bought. It is a natural energy company that is homed here in Canada. It's one of the best performing Canadian stocks, and it also is part of the second largest industry, which is still oil here in Canada and the energy sector. We still dominate. Luckily, Canada dominates the energy sector, which is very fruitful if you're not in oil. Natural energy here, we have some of the best companies on the planet. Northland Power is one of them, and they do things globally in Europe, Germany, things like that, offshore wind projects. And that is why I own it, because it's one of the only industries that's still doing really well in Canada. So essentially, if you want to get into any real industry to make money today, guys, it's either going to have to be services or energy, because everything else is basically declined. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, because this, if you live in Canada and the US, you're going to understand something. This is us if you're looking at us from an outsider, and this is you if you are Canadian like me. So, more importantly, guys, if you live in Canada, the chances are you're like me, which means you probably don't make much more than $34,204 a year. How did I come up with that number? That is the Canadian government average income for 2018. And it actually is up quite a little bit, not a terribly large amount, but it is going up, which is a nice thing to see. So what I want to move on here before I get into the real estate side of things, guys, this makes up you. Now we need to look at what is going on with population, because population has a big correlation to real estate. Now, since 2000 to 2020, guys, we're 1 year out, and we're basically going to be somewhere between 37 and 38 million Canadians. We went from 31 million, and this is exponentially going up faster than we've been anticipating. And this is growing up exponentially faster than we were expecting it to, which is an interesting sign at how much the Canadian economy might continue to grow into the future. But essentially by 2030, they were expecting the entire population to be somewhere around 40 million, but now they're thinking it's going to be a lot more than that if this rate continues to increase. Now, before we finish down here where I'm going to explain to you my full thesis, but looking at inflation as well, guys, inflation is the most diluted number I've ever heard of in my life. If you don't know what inflation is, it's just the general prices of things around you going up. Now, the way they come up with this statistic is very convoluted because they literally only pick a basket full of products that don't really help make you understand the full cusp of inflation overall. I don't think inflation numbers are accurate anymore because it doesn't seem to take in housing. If it took into housing, it would be up way more than that. So I want to go back to population, and then I'm going to explain to you a little bit more about inflation because it doesn't really match the housing market, because the housing market's gone up huge, education's gone up huge, but inflation has stayed at par. It's up a little bit. Figured it'd be up a lot more. But basically, we need to look at population because I think this is the main driving factor toward what is going on in the Canadian real estate sector. I'm going to make some very bold statements in a second, and they're just my opinions from my own personal experiences, so please do take these with a grain of salt. But this is speculative, okay? So basically, we got to talk about how are people getting into Canada. Canada is one of the easiest countries right now to get into, and you're probably thinking to yourself, what do you mean by that? In the US, they're making it extremely hard to get a full work visa, let alone trying to actually get a citizenship is one heck of a challenge in the US. Canada is pretty much doors wide open. Canada is made up of one of the most diverse cultures on the planet. It is probably one of the most freest countries on the planet, free healthcare. It's pretty amazing in those aspects, and I love the culture here. I am a full-time magician. I am also in the service industry. Now, you can basically take a look at the fact that I work in places where there is a lot of foreign students. Students get work visas, they come over, they work here, they usually go back home. People come in here, they get work visas at a young age. Most of our schools today are made up of international students. Students get sent from all over the world, they come here. They get educated, they try and get a work visa here, and I imagine most of them have an end goal of living here, as a lot of the people that I work with do. Don't get me wrong, great people. I just finished working at a resort. This guy just got a 3-year work visa, and he plans on basically getting full citizenship and says it probably won't take longer than a year. And even if he marries his girlfriend, who is a Canadian, he becomes citizen anyways, right? It's really easy to come over here, get a job, work here for a few years, guys, meet a girl, get married, call it a day, family comes over, things are great. It's usually how it goes. But as we have private equity is the second and probably one of the more larger situations. For the longest time, foreign money was coming into the country through private businesses, private equity. The government didn't really know where that money was coming from. It was coming from Russia, a lot of it from China, and probably a lot of mobster money in there as well. And they were pumping money into the condo markets like there was no bloody tomorrow. In fact, even till this date, guys, condo, basically the average rate of return has been 14% over the last 4 years, which is absolutely staggering. But yet the rest of home prices over the last 4 years has dropped, and even this year we're down about 2% in the average home price. Now, why is that? Well, we're looking at a huge influx of renters, because if you are like me, and you know you're only making $31,000 a year, and you're probably still paying off your student loans, which thank God I am not, but I feel bad for you if you are. But essentially, if you're only making that kind of money, guys, do you know how long it's going to take you to come up with a down payment on the average home? That is a staggering number. So that means you're going to have to come up with about 20% on $500,000. So if you're going to come up with 20% and fully fund it yourself, you're looking at basically coming up with about $100,000. And there's no way on a $34,000 income you're going to get approved for a $400,000 mortgage, which means you're probably going to have to get your parents to co-sign for it. And then on top of that, you're going to be really, really stretched if you got to fix anything in that house. But luckily, interest rates have come down. We're looking at a 2.9% interest rate if you are approved for a real interest rate and not one of those secondhand mortgages. But essentially, do I think this is a good idea for you? If you are in the situation I am in, I do not recommend you jump into real estate until you get your income up. $34,000 a year today is not going to buy you a house if you're a Canadian citizen. And you can blame that on the influx of income that the Canadian government has allowed to come in from other countries to expand the economy. Now that they're so worried, because basically we've been priced out of the market, the people that live here, that is, the average person, that's been here for a while, family, my parents are farmers, had kids like me, had to work hard. Every dime I have in my investment account, I worked for. And do you know how hard it is for me to get money to buy a house? It's like, it would stretch me out so far, I wouldn't have a lot of room. Even with an emergency fund, it wouldn't be enough, guys. And I don't want to take on that responsibility. But in the same aspect, if you can afford a house, I don't see this stopping. Foreign income is going to keep coming into the country. It keeps finding ways in. People keep buying homes, and it's not our money buying the homes. It is not me and you raising the Canadian housing market. Just think about that for a second, guys. If you can't afford it like I can, you're living at home until you're pretty much 30. That's what most millennials seem to be doing today. for very, very good reason. So basically all I'm focused on, like I said, in the short term is getting myself in a position where I can hopefully be able to afford a house by using my RRSP to defer it as a first-time home buyer. I can defer my income into a registered retirement savings plan, and when I feel suit, I can pull that money out and buy a house. But the problem is, guys, that the lower class, there's going to be a big divide between the rich and the poor coming. And honestly, the reason I think that housing is going to start cooling off is just because the fact that the economy here, the government hasn't made it good for business. Business is leaving the country. The only business we have here is so regulated, it doesn't have room for growth. The illegal markets, especially the marijuana industry, are still dominating. The government screwed that up royally. And even though marijuana is part of the GDP, it makes up nothing. It should be one of the largest industries right now, and it doesn't even equate on this list for GDP. It's so ridiculous to me. Anyways, guys, that's a whole side note in and of itself. But at the end of the day, guys, we're basically looking at a world where if you want to live in a home, it's going to cost you more than ever, and you're going to start losing equity in it as you have for the last 3 years. Now, if you buy a condo and you're buying it as an investment piece of property, chances are you're going to make a 14% return if you do it right. Maybe even better if you buy yourself what we call a wedged deal, which is a little harder in the condo market. Things are changing here. There are more people renting than buying that well. But the fact is, guys, homes here are just really expensive. You can go to the US, whether you want to argue this or not, there are cheaper places to buy homes. The only cheap places to buy homes in Canada are so bloody remote, you're not going to want to live there. And an hour out of the city, guys, homes are still unbelievably expensive. Like I said, for the average income for what housing costs, it's going to take me and you a little longer than we probably expect to get into housing. So I'm just going to put myself in the position, as I have said, to bank some money, get it there, and then hopefully either find a really good wedge deal that might come up, or best case scenario, housing really does cool off. We see a good correction by another 10 or 15%, and then we can actually afford to buy homes when they reasonably come back down to that $300,000 to $400,000 mark instead of that $500,000 to $600,000 mark, which we're progressively starting to see. It comes down to that foreign income. I don't know, guys. It's a big thing to understand. We got a lot going on in this system, so stay cool, stay awesome. I hope you learned something. Consider slapping a like and subscribing. I'm going to talk to you real soon.